Welcome guys, in this video we're going to continue our MCQs for the same topic but from question 34 onwards. Before we begin, here's a short insight about our topical past papers. Beneath each topic and for each subject, you will have a specific QR code, which when you scan, you will be headed onto a playlist on YouTube, which is specifically made for that particular topic, and you have all the explanations on every question in that playlist. All you have to do is just scan a QR code, which would save your time and also enhance your concepts. That's why our topicals are very unique and they will help you achieve an A star in all your subjects. So now let's finally begin with the video. Lesson number 34. How does hormonal control usually differ from nervous control? Now when we compare these both systems, हम इनके एक एग्जाम्पल ले लेते हैं. जैसे नर्वस कंट्रोल की तो बहुत एक आम सी एग्जाम्पल दैट इफ यू टच्ड एन हॉट ऑब्जेक्ट. Once you touch the hot object, you immediately pull away your hand. That is our body's protective measure. But the important thing to note here is that within 1 millisecond to 3 milliseconds, you can see that you pull your hand away. That means the response generated and the speed of message is really fast in the nervous control as compared to the hormonal control. Hormonal control की आप ये एग्जाम्पल ले सकते हैं. For example, you had your breakfast. Now, after 1 to 2 hours, this is happening in milliseconds and this is happening in hours. You can see that within 1 to 2 hours, your blood glucose level would again be normalized by the production of insulin, which is an hormone that controls your blood glucose level. तो स्पीड ऑफ मैसेज किसकी ज़्यादा फास्ट हुई नर्वस कंट्रोल की बट हेयर दे हैव आस्क्ड यू टू कंपेयर हार्मोनल कंट्रोल विद द नर्वस कंट्रोल so it has to be slower in comparison. So either C or D would be the answers, not A and B. Now talking about the duration of effect, would it be for long term or short term? Now if you talk about nervous control, तो जो आप अपना हाथ फौरन से उठाते हैं that is short term effect because you're pulling your hand away very quickly. But if you talk about hormonal control, the hormones effect remains for quite a long period of time. So C is our answer because the hormonal control's duration of effect is long term in comparison to nervous system, which duration of effect is short term. Question 35. A girl is waiting at a bus stop and is watching a bus traveling towards her. What happens to her eyes as the bus gets closer? This is a question about accommodation reflex, in which your eyes adjust according to the distance. Whether you're watching a distant object or a nearby object, your eyes will adjust accordingly with the help of ciliary muscles, suspensory ligaments, and changing the shape of lens. So let's have a closer look on what happens when you're trying to look at a nearby object. In this picture, you can see what happens. Here are your ciliary muscle present. Now, this question comes up often in your exams in which you have to label in the eye where the ciliary or the suspensory ligaments are present. Lens is quite easy to identify, but you should also know how to identify the ciliary and the suspensory ligaments. This is the closer view of what actually happens. So the ciliary muscles are contracting here and the suspensory ligaments are relaxing or they are slackened, which means they're loosened up. So all these words have the same meaning, but the examiner can trick you by writing different words and asking you the same exact thing on what happens if you look at a distant or a nearby object. And remember that your lens is more bulged out or is more rounded. If you compare it with distant object, you can see how thin the lens is. So now let's see which options are right according to what we just looked at. The ciliary muscles were contracting, so they were contracting more because if they were contracting less, that would have been distant object or they were relaxing. So it has to be either C and D. A and B cannot be the options. The shape of the lens was more rounded, so it is automatically D because C says that they were less rounded. But let's have a look at the last column. It says change in suspensory ligaments. They were in less tension because they were relaxed. So remember, all these words are having the same meaning. You just need to know that examiner can ask you in different words, but they all would have the same meaning, and you would have to just select the right option according to the situation. Question number 36. How will the skin of an athlete respond during a long run? Since the athlete has been running for a long period of time, he must be feeling really hot due to the vigorous activity that he's performing. So, what would happen to the width of his blood vessels in the skin surface, and would sweating increase or decrease in his body? Let's look what happens to the blood vessels. When the person is feeling hot, his blood vessels dilate, or in other words, their diameter increases, which allows more blood flow so that more heat can be escaped out of the body, preventing overheating. And on the opposite scenario, when the person feels cold, the blood vessel constricts or decreases in diameter so that the heat in the body can be retained. So, when the person was feeling hot, the width of his blood vessels increased. So, either C or D will be our answers. And we'll confirm our answer once we're done with the next column, which is sweating. Sweating increases during summers or when the person has been performing an activity for a long period of time. So, for example, you're running, swimming, jogging, all the vigorous exercises you're doing, your sweating will be increased because that is your body's mechanism to cool down itself. सो व्हाट हैपेंस इज दैट स्वेट ग्लैंड जो है आपका स्वेट ज़्यादा प्रोड्यूस करने लग जाता है और वो आपकी स्किन के सरफेस पे आ जाता है एंड इट इवेपोरेट्स विच लीव्स बिहाइंड अ कूलिंग इफेक्ट सो हेयर डी वुड बी आर आंसर बिकॉज बोथ the things increase. Question number 37. Which statement describes a simple reflex action involving an arm or leg? So, a reflex action is automatic and rapid response to protect ourselves. An arm or leg can be an effector organ. A. It does not involve the brain or spinal cord. Now, remember a very important point about the reflex action is that in the reflex action, your conscious part of the brain is not involved. In other terms, your brain is not involved because this is a rapid and automatic response. तो हमारे पास इतना टाइम नहीं होता फॉर एग्जाम्पल इन अ सिचुएशन यू टच्ड एन हॉट ऑब्जेक्ट नाउ वंस यू हैव टच दैट हॉट ऑब्जेक्ट आप दिमाग से अपना कॉन्शियस पार्ट यूटिलाइज नहीं कर रहे होते यू डू नॉट थिंक दैट शुड आई रिमूव माई हैंड और नो दिस इज अ रैपिड रिस्पॉन्स एंड immediately you withdraw your finger. So that means the brain is not involved, but the spinal cord is involved. So A cannot be our answer. B says that it involves the spinal cord and the brain is informed as to what has happened. No, because then it wouldn't be a rapid and automatic response because the conscious part of the brain is involved. C, it involves the spinal cord without any information passing to the brain. This is our correct answer. But let's look at the last option, which says the response is caused by nerve impulses from the brain. Again, it involves the brain. So remember, there is no brain involved in the simple reflex action, only spinal cord is. Question number 38. What happens when a person focuses on a near object? This is again a question about accommodation reflex, and we have solved lots of questions like this in our previous videos. We need to talk about the ciliary muscles, the lens, and the suspensory ligaments. So let's zoom into the picture to really know what's happening in our eye. When we look at a nearby object, the first thing जो आपके लिए बहुत आसान होगी याद करना वो ये है कि आपका लेंस जो है दैट इज bulged out. Bulged out means that it is more rounded. So let's see in the options what words have been we given. We've been given rounded and thin. So thin is when you look at a distant object, आप देख सकते हैं कि ये thin हो गया है. Or it, yeah, this is what's written that the lens is pulled thin. So the options that tell the lens are rounded are A and C. तो B और D तो हमारी options हो ही नहीं सकती. Now checking whether the ciliary muscles contract or relax, because this is same for both the options that the suspensory ligaments will be loose. और आप देख भी सकते हैं कि suspensory ligaments loose हैं या slackened है. Slackened means that they are like this, which is loose, right? So you have different terms used by the examiner, but remember they all have the same meaning and you can write either of them. So what happens to the ciliary muscle? They contract, and you can see here. And they're present on this part of your eye. So they contract. Hence the option will be A. Because in C it says relax, which is not true. Question 39. The diagram represents a section through the skin, which shows the functions of the labeled parts. Starting with X, this is your receptor, and its function is to detect all the external stimulus. For example, if your skin got pricked by a sharp object or you touched an hot object, receptors will sense that external stimulus and impulses will pass from the sensory neurons. Y is your blood vessel, and its job is to control the heat loss from the blood. So, whether you have to retain heat, that means prevent heat loss, or whether you have to let the heat escape from your blood, it is the job of the blood vessel to either constrict or dilate accordingly. And that is done by checking the inner temperature of the body, and it is a mechanism that is done by thermoregulation. C is your sweat gland, which releases a fluid called sweat. And in summers, the production of sweat increases because our body needs to cool down, and this is the mechanism our body does for cooling down. In winters, you have seen yourself that sweating in your body decreases because there is no need for the body to cool down. So the right answer is going to be A. Question number 40. Which structure in the brain registers changes in the blood concentration? Is it cerebellum, hypothalamus, medulla, or pituitary gland? We're going to study all the parts of the brain and then identify. Starting with cerebellum, it is involved in coordinating voluntary muscle movements, maintaining balance, and motor skills. तो इससे तो हमें पता चल गया कि it has no direct connection with registration of changes in the blood concentration. Moving on to medulla. It is the part of the brainstem and it is involved in regulating your heartbeat, breathing, and blood pressure. So, again, it is not involved in registering changes in blood concentration either. Pituitary gland is also known as the master gland because it releases many important hormones that regulate our body functions, such as including growth, reproduction, or metabolism. Finally, hypothalamus is the right answer because it is the key structure that is involved in monitoring and responding to changes in blood concentration and maintaining overall homeostasis in the body. So it has to be hypothalamus, which is B. Question 41. The diagram shows a section through a human eye. Where are the receptors for the pupil iris reflex? Remember, examiner आपको pupillary reflex भी कह सकता है, pupil reflex भी कह सकता है instead of iris reflex. So you should not be confused. They are the same things. यहाँ पे मैंने points में सब कुछ बताया हुआ है and if you memorize this, it would be beneficial for your P1 and as well as for your P2. Starting with the sensors, the iris reflex involves the contraction or dilation of the pupil in response to changes in light intensity. So, whether there is a bright or dim light, there would be the contraction or the dilation of the pupil in response to that. Now, where are the receptors present in your eye? And that is our actual question. They are present in the outermost layer of the retina, which is known as the outer nuclear layer. But you're not supposed to memorize this term because it is not asked in your exam. All you have to memorize is that the outermost layer of the retina में आपके receptors present होते हैं. And they are your photoreceptors, which are known as the rods and cones. And they are going to detect the light. And once they detect the light, the signal will be sent to the brain by your optic nerve, which emerges from here. From here. This is your optic nerve. Now, what happens once the brain has been given the signal, it processes it. And once it processes it, the impulses are sent to the iris muscle. Now, accordingly, the iris muscle will then adjust its size based on the brain signals. So, here is a picture attached to show you and explain you further. So, what happens if there is the signal for dim light? The radial muscles would contract in the iris, which are just like radiations. And the circular muscles would be relaxing while the radial muscles would contract in dim light, and that would lead to the pupil being dilated. Whereas in the bright light, it's just the opposite. The circular muscles contract and the radial muscles would relax, and that would force the pupil to contract or decrease in diameter. While the pupil dilates, it means that its diameter has increased, and in contraction, you can see the diameter has decreased. So that's all you need to know. The right answer would be D, therefore. Alright, this is our last question for today's video. Question number 42. Which flow diagram shows the regulation of blood sugar levels? So we've been given two scenarios. One is exercising and the other one is eating a meal. And it starts from having a normal blood sugar concentration and it eventually we have done these two activities and have been processes and again we reach to the normal blood sugar level. So we need to find out which processes are right and which are not. And obviously the right one would be our answer. So starting with the first scenario which is exercising. जब हम exercise करते हैं तो हमारी blood sugar level rise करता है या decrease करता है. So the blood sugar level is being decreased. Why? Because once we exercise, the muscles utilize glycogen directly for energy during exercise. हम कोई भी vigorous activity करते हैं, exercise करते हैं, we need energy to do that and we gain that directly from glycogen which is the stored form of glucose. यानी कि हमारा blood sugar level goes down, which we can see in A, B, and D option, not in C. That means C तो हमारा आंसर नहीं हो सकता. Even in the other scenario, which is eating a meal. Our blood sugar level rises after we eat a meal. For example, आपने सुबह नाश्ता किया है, which is cereal. Now you had your carbs. Now eventually after digesting, they will be broken down from complex sugars into glucose. And since it is being absorbed into the bloodstream, that means our blood sugar levels have risen. So we can see that in A, B, and D, but not in C again. So C is ruled out now from our answers. Next, once the blood sugar level rises, you should know that the pancreas produces more insulin. That is because it has to facilitate the glucose uptake by the cells in the liver. Once the cells absorb glucose, once they're permeable to glucose, they will store it in the form of glycogen. और जब भी हमारी बॉडी को ज़रूरत होगी वो ग्लाइकोजन दोबारा से रीयूज हो सकते हैं इनटू ग्लूकोज. So we need to see that the blood sugar level rises and the pancreas produce more insulin, which is we can see that in A and D options but not in B. So B is ruled out again. Now we have to select from A and D. Let's come to the next point, which says the liver turns glycogen to glucose. After eating a meal, why would you want your blood glucose level to rise even more? Because glycogen is the stored form of glucose और वो liver में stored होती है. So why would we want it to be reconverted into glucose again? So A in this case is wrong. Looking at the other perspective from exercise, हम देख सकते हैं कि liver turn करता है glucose into glycogen. Let's see is this true or no. Glycogen conversion during exercise. What happens is that the glycogen conversion during exercise is like this. The muscles break down glycogen into glucose, so they reconvert it into glucose so that they can meet energy demands during exercise. So that means A was wrong in this perspective as well, and D is our answer. Let's look at D. What does it say? It says that the liver turns glucose into glycogen, which is true because we do not want our blood sugar level to rise further. And looking at the other perspective, it said that the liver turns glycogen into glucose, which is true because our muscles need more energy during the exercise time. So that brings us to the end of the video और next video में हम solve करेंगे question 43 से question 53 तक. So take care. Allah Hafiz.